For what purpose does the under Speaker's announced policy, January 4, 2021, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a devastating time for the people of Pakistan, and I rise to share with my colleagues and to ensure that their story is in the public eye, because it is a story that addresses devastation like you've never seen it before. And I guess the story that is so devastating is the 600,000 women who are on the verge of giving birth in conditions that are so devastating. The week of September 2nd, members of the Congressional Pakistan Caucus made their way as quickly as they could to the rain-torn, flood-torn region of Pakistan. We arrived on Sunday morning and immediately were able to secure transport into the flooded areas. As the government indicated, this is not overflowing rivers. This is sheer rain that generated into flooding. In the Sindh region, Balochistan, northern region, sheer rain that turned into floods that were unspeakable. The water was unspeakable, but it was a biblical proportion. The size and the width and the depth was unspeakable. It was a monstrosity. When we took our aerial survey, you could not see land. It was only water as far as the eye could see. In fact, tragically and unfortunately, we could imagine that whole communities were covered with the water, that bodies are yet unfound, even though the death toll is upwards of 1,200 to 1,300, with 1/3 or more of those being children. Can you imagine seeing the video, the currents rushing and tearing children away from desperate parents' hands, or families being caught in the torrent and children being pulled away by the waters rushing? We saw, as displayed by the government, whole buildings, hotels coming down to the ground, 200 bridges destroyed, and water going through those bridges. We could, of course, see that it was irreparable harm. Even as we were surveying, we saw a bridge that was breached, which divided people that were on that one little line of bridge as their safety net because they were surrounded by water. And then they were separated because the bridge broke in half because the water was so powerful. In the midst of that, we got a report that the military forces had to flood towns of 250,000 people, flood towns, so that a city of 1.1 million people could survive. We landed in the city of Dadu, and there are now 400,000 homeless people in Dadu. Overwhelmed. There are 600,000 plus homeless people in Pakistan. And so I know that America is a nation that has always extended its generous arm. if there's ever a moment, as we have done around the world in earthquakes, Pakistan's earthquake of 2005, its floods of 2010, but as we've done around the world, when the nations around the world have fallen upon disastrous times, as a member of Congress, I went into that horrific tsunami that impacted Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia. You could not recognize those nations. The tsunami had come and taken out all of the coastal land. People were drawn into the sea that you never saw them again. Housings were destroyed. The United States joined with the United Nations and was there to help. The United States has helped when there have been issues of national health crisis. We've been there. We became the leading guardians of fighting HIV/AIDS, and particularly on the continent of Africa. And I do want to applaud the Biden administration for being the first donor of the United Nations call for help for Pakistan, $30 million. And just as we were leaving, after we had petitioned the federal government, they came with an extra $20 million. But more importantly, as I left to go to Pakistan, writing President Biden about the issue of shelter and tents, and the military, United States military, delivered 300,000 tents on Wednesday or Thursday of last week to be delivered to homeless and helpless persons. The Pakistani American community have been outstanding, working with consul generals across America and the ambassador. They're now raising funds upwards of millions of dollars, but it's not enough. First, Pakistan probably has $10 billion in damages and destruction, but that number has been characterized as low because the water has not been able to drain because there is no drainage. And that means that that water not being able to drain, that damage will be caused and go on and on and on. I am afraid of dengue fever, waterborne diseases, hepatitis, malaria, with no medications. While we're there, we met a family that had just been plucked out of the waters, and their dad was a kidney transplant who had not yet received his medicine, everything lost. We were able to press upon the military's generosity and good heart to get him his medicine and get it to where he is, out in an area where I saw no medical facilities. So I want this record to be known that even though this country is many miles away, we're connected by its democratic beginnings. This is its 75th anniversary of its independence. And it has, by and large, had peaceful transfer of government and a frequent government, but a democratic government. And the founding father, Dr. Jinnah, established this country as India was established by Gandhi in its independence, that it should have as its form of government democracy. But I am fearful of the loss of life and children and disease that will set this country back for many, many, many years. Let me share with you this story. The hospital has nothing. Pakistani floods put pregnant women in danger. Just 2 days ago, this article from The Guardian came out. A third of the country is underwater, and a UN fund says almost 650,000 women in affected areas need maternity services. That should give you an amazing level of fear. 650,000. I visit hospitals because I'm an advocate for hospitals, particularly in rural areas. And they tell me, well, we've delivered 3,000 births in a month. And I applaud that. That's a high number here in the United States. But I want to say this again. The UN says almost 650,000 women in affected areas need maternity services to have healthy babies. Crying, vomiting, and 8 months pregnant I know that wives and members of Congress, women members of Congress, women across America can understand the fragility of a woman during her pregnancy. The young woman walked in labor pains for an hour in search of an ambulance. She wasn't driven. She wasn't on a bicycle. She wasn't on a cart. She wasn't on any form of scooter, any form of transportation. When Asiba, 23, eventually found one, she had to beg the driver to take her. Pakistan floods had left the roads damaged and gridlocked, making what is usually a 2-hour journey to the provincial capital of Quetta a punishing 12-hour drive, 2 hours to 12 hours. She left her flood-ravaged home in Nasirabad district in Balochistan province in the morning and reached Quetta at night. During this time, I didn't know what was happening around me. Struggling to speak, when I finally reached the hospital, the doctors said I would not survive if they didn't operate immediately. Complications with labor, including severe high blood pressure, meant doctors had to rush to deliver the baby. I would venture to say that this was a circumstance of life and death. Complications with the labor continued. Nasiba said she gave birth to a baby boy 2 days ago, but the doctors told that the baby requires to be incubated, but there was no incubators available, so we had to take her baby to my mother's place. She said, I haven't seen my baby yet. We can only hope that that baby survived and that the help at home might have helped that baby breathe. Nasiba is one of the thousands of pregnant women, according to the United Nations Population Fund, who bear the brunt of the worst floods in Pakistan and are in desperate need of maternal health services. And so I'll be asking USAID and the head of that agency, who I'm very gratified was visiting Pakistan as we were leaving, USAID was coming on the ground. As we were there, we received a briefing from USAID, and the very schools that USAID, our humanitarian arm of the State Department, built in that region became the shelters for people. But that means the children are not in school. More than a dozen women were interviewed in this story, were pregnant or had already given birth in the worst flood-affected provinces of Balochistan and Sindh. Women who said they have been abandoned without health care, food, and clean drinking water to meet their nutritional needs. We should be very clear, a third of Pakistan is underwater, with 1,400 dead, most of children, and 33 million people affected. As the country has been ravaged by monsoon-triggered floods, coming at a totally unique time. In our briefings, they said, we have dealt with monsoons. These are like we had never seen. The impact on climate change should not be lost. This is clear evidence of how stark it is. UNFPA said 73,000 women were expected to give birth this month. That's this month of September, who need skilled birth attendants, newborn care and support. It estimates, as I said, that 650,000 pregnant women in flood-affected areas require maternal health. Again, people living in plastic tents or camps on roadsides near floodwaters, and the homes of millions of people have been swept away. It is well known that the health facilities across Pakistan are affected. 432 are fully damaged, 1,228 are partially damaged. Another woman, Rabina, who is 8 months pregnant in this Guardian story and currently lives in a tent on a roadside, said she had pregnancy-related complications that included body aches and anemia. She said medications prescribed by doctors were not available, and she cannot afford to buy them from a private hospital. They did whatever they could for her husband and brother. They've lost their source of earnings and cannot provide us with anything else. And the government hospital has nothing. This is a story of thousands. This is not a story that is going to end. It is a story that is going to continue. Another woman had delivered on her way as she was walking to the hospital, and the infant was brought into the hospital via ambulance, but the woman couldn't come because of the high level of water. Many women could not even come to the hospital, and midwives had to be called. We're doing all that we can. And this is a call out to our American humanitarian agencies. As I indicated, health care is the most crucial along with food. And it is clearly an urgent emergency condition. One young woman left her home after it was submerged in floodwater in the Sindh province. And as I said, many people are living in schools built by the United States. This young woman gave birth to a baby girl named Shama, which means light. We get food sometimes, but not at other times. I am unable to feed my infant because I'm so weak. And so baby formula is needed because women are not able to breastfeed. Arshan, another displaced woman who had given birth a month ago, everyone is falling sick here. I feel faint. I have constant headaches. Our children do not have clothes. There's only one piece of cloth for my newborn that I wash every day to use again. And UNFPA has warned that many women and girls are at increased risk of gender-based violence, as almost 1 million houses were damaged in the catastrophic floods. I am convinced that that is another crisis. As Samina, who took refuge along with thousands of other pregnant women in Lahaina, said, there can be no greater pain than having to leave your home. I cannot tell you how difficult it was to leave. I'm expecting a baby soon, but in a state of homelessness. The government is working very hard to try and reach these persons. But in the midst, they face a financial crisis, of which they are working very hard to try to cure with work with the World Bank and, of course, with the International Monetary Fund. But it is not going to be enough. And so our visit, we are grateful, highlighted the crisis in which is being faced. It was a visit covered with a desire to be as quick on humanitarian aid as we could and to bring the story forward as to what is transpiring. In addition, we wanted to make sure that those who could not get back to their province and here in the United States could secure a temporary protected status because of the devastation of their country. We hope, joined with Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, that our request will be given reasonable consideration. As I indicated as I started, we're dealing with an extreme climate change, horrible exhibition of the devastation that could come about. It is extreme. The reasons for the flooding are linked to climate change and the resulting extreme weather. It is important to note that Pakistan produces only about 1% of the pollution, the carbon footprint linked to global warming, while we in the United States produce 11%, China 27%, India produces 6.6%, and the EU 6.4%. But researchers say the catastrophe probably started with unprecedented heat waves, because in April and May, temperatures reached above 104 degrees in Pakistan for sustained periods in many places in the region. In fact, when we were briefed by the head of the climate agency, They said the temperatures went up as high as 127 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are killing temperatures. On one sweltering day in May, the city in Jacobabad topped 123.8 degrees. This is not normal. This area is not accustomed to heat like this, and recorded as the hottest place on earth was in Pakistan. The intense heat also melted glaciers in the northern mountainous regions. And now many would wonder, glaciers? Yes. One of the other places in the world where glaciers are the mountains in Pakistan. And so when those glaciers, those northern mountainous regions, increasing the amount of water flowing into tributaries that eventually made their way into the Indus River, compounded by the rains. The Indus is Pakistan's largest river and runs the country's length from north to south, feeding towns, cities, and large swatches of agricultural land along the way. But let me add something else, because Pakistan is an agricultural country, and the largest percentage of work in Pakistan is agriculture. The region where the flooding took place was where they grew one of their most bountiful products, and that is wheat. The farmers managed to gather their wheat and to store them in their homes, preparing for the market or preparing for next year. But the floods came and wiped away their homes and their food source and the monies that they would get from selling. But even more devastating, this may go on for years because they lost their seeds. So imagine that. Mighty waters flowing down from the glaciers, melting because of this unusual heat, this out-of-the-world heat. Then rivers overflow, but then add to the monsoons of monsoons. And then, of course, the flooding. They've taken away millions of homes, impacted 33 million people, and taken away their food. We as Americans have faced our levels of disaster. My heart goes out to the people in eastern Illinois, St. Louis, Missouri, eastern Kentucky, central Mississippi, Dallas, Texas, Death Valley, California. And this does not include the 1,000-year flood events that impacted in recent years New York and New Jersey. We should be well aware of the impact of climate change. And I'm very gratified that I've seen my constituents in the energy industry face up to this and realize that the common footprint must come down, down, down. I want to continue to work with them as they recognize that it'll be a disaster if we do not work both nationally and internationally on stopping the carbon footprint and addressing the question internationally and nationally of the question of climate change. The rains in Pakistan have resulted in unimaginable changes in the landscape. Reports back up by new images taken by NASA's MODIS. Satellite sensor shows the results of heavy rain and an overflowing Indus River that has formed a 62-mile lake in the Sindh province where there was farmland. In this region, the monsoon rainfall has been 500% over average. So let me try to lay this out for you. I indicated the Indus River is the natural river. But the leaders of government explained it was not the Indus River that overflowed its banks and caused the damage miles away from its bank. Though there are many Pakistani Americans who live on the bank because it's a source of their food, source of their income, source of their livelihood. But what the NASA's MODIS showed us is that an unnatural lake was created by the huge monsoons, the glaciers melting, and created an unnatural lake that formed a 62-mile lake in the Sindh province where there was farmland. So where there had not been any water before, and they also told us that the property or the area that we were in, the Sindh province, did not receive a lot of rain, which speaks to the reason why they had no drainage, because they did not have a lot of rain. But the issues of the day caused the Indus River to be an ocean. You could see no start and stop. And then it caused a man-made lake to occur that would, in fact, be there enough of a time to, in fact, continue to be devastating. So let me give you some facts that have not been gone over. This began in mid-June of 2022, at the beginning of the monsoon season, which, as I said, there have been monsoons, but these were of monstrosity, unbelievable proportions. Heavy rains began flooding areas of Pakistan. Estimates range from double to several times the normal monsoon rain. They were just sitting and waiting. Is it going to end? Is it going to end? 6.4 million estimated people requiring humanitarian assistance. Again, 33 million people affected. 44% Sindh province, 28% Balochistan, and 13% in Khyber, 50% in Punjab. As of September 13, just shortly after we came and left, 1,396 people have been killed, and of course, 12,278 people have been injured as a result of the flooding, and we don't know if people will die of their injuries. More than 900,000 livestock have been killed, and there are people today, right as we stand here, who are refusing to leave because they have their livestock and there's no place else for them to go. 3.1 million people have been displaced. I've already indicated that there are hundreds of thousands that are homeless, 650,000 women needing maternal services on the verge of giving birth, but 70,000 are giving birth this month. This is, without question, a challenge that far surpasses the capacity of the Pakistan government, although willing to be able to do this on their own. The climate minister told a public radio interview that an area the size of Colorado is now submerged. 66 districts, equivalent to a county, are underwater. And according to satellite imagery, the flooding has created, as I indicated already, this huge lake. But Pakistan is equipped with water pumps to respond to monsoons and helicopters for rescue purposes, but there's no place to send the resources. Again, I do want to note that the Pakistan government has been working with the resources they have. 147 camps for populations displaced by the floods. Cash assistance was being organized to give to the families. The Pakistani government has allocated $173 million to aid flood-affected people. On August 30th, the United Nations, the government of Pakistan, launched a joint floods response plan, and the United States, as I said, was the first to give the funding from all other countries. They gathered $160 million for food security assistance for agriculture, livestock, shelter, non-food items, non-nutrition programs, primary health services, water and sanitation, shelter for displaced persons. It's not enough, and there are people that cannot be reached. Money also coming from the various elected officials like the Prime Minister, the Central Emergency Response Fund, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the European Commission's Department for European Civil Protection, and UNICEF. Governments from around the world have made an effort to help, but I believe it's going to be important for the United States to raise its voice again. As I said, the United States has always been there And I'm very glad to say that 1.4 million pounds of USAID relief commodities released for airlift to Pakistan by CENTCOM, 4 million in dedicated USA Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. As I indicated, 300,000 tents, 30 million had already been given on the very day, August 30th, that the United Nations asked for. CENTCOM has operated 9 flights transporting USAID items, including approximately 30,000 kitchen sets, 10,000 plastic tarps, 1,400 rolls of plastic sheeting from USAID's warehouse. But again, the 300,000 tents, after the Pakistan caucus had engaged and worked with the administration, we're very glad to say, came forward. Then an additional 20 million in humanitarian assistance in response to the flooding was announced on September 9th. I do thank, again, the USAID Administrator Samantha Power, who announced this effort, and we hope that this will continue. As noted in the Washington Post, the U.S. ramps up aid for Pakistan floods with military airlift, and I ask unanimous consent to put the Washington Post article in the record for September 9th, 2022. And I now
Without objection.
ask unanimous consent for the article from The Guardian dealing with the plight of a pregnant woman be put into the record as well.
Without objection.
So let me show you what people are facing and how people are struggling. This is, as someone would say, with your own eyes. These little small pieces here, those are human beings. This was their refuge. This is water. This is water. As far as the eye can see, they were making a life, barely, on a bridge. That was the only dry land. And I can see they were on both sides, but they were able to get notice to run on this side so that they could be together. But they are stranded as this water breaks a bridge. It breaks the bridge. Water as far as the eye can see. This is what we saw. These are not little bushes in a lake. These are the tops of trees, the green that you see. Most of the land covered. Some people are stranded on these little patches of land. Looks like a beautiful blue ocean. No land. And the fear of what is under this massive ocean. And as I said earlier, there are pumps in normal times because there's no normal draining. But there's absolutely no ability to deal with something as massive as this. It is speculated that it will not come down for another 6 months. Stagnant water, disease raging across Pakistan. So this is just to let us look at a little bit of dry land, Dadu, working with the military, giving out food items to an elderly woman without food resources, and a little child looking up. Babies in hands who are obviously in need of resources. It was an emotional time for the Pakistan caucus and the members who were there showing our love and affection. Because We want people to see the provincial leadership that have worked to establish a dry land and to try and work without resources for their community. The face of this little one tells it all. There are no schools. There's not much food. And there's not much housing. You could not have a dry eye in watching the conditions of our fellow human beings. We gave out food, but we gave out little lollipops to the children. And I would tell you they were clamoring for that more than anything else. But that's what I think our biggest concern between mothers providing, having provisions for giving birth and feeding these little ones. I asked one little boy, does he want to go to school? There are no schools in that region. The schools that, as I said, were built by USAID were in fact used to ensure that there is shelter. We need more tents. We need more health care. It was interesting, the heat was extensive and intensive while we were there. In my conversations, it was so good to be able to maybe not speak with language that we both understood, but with the gesture of welcoming and appreciating their plight as we were giving out food gifts to people who had nothing. It is a moment in history that I did not want our colleagues to miss. And it is a recognition that we have work to do. And I wanted our colleagues to help me and to help us find a way to be constructive. So I use the number of 10 billion. We've gone way beyond that, as I indicated. The economic impact of the floods is now estimated to be at least 30 billion as of September 13, 2022. Just the difference from when we went at the beginning of September of 10 billion, and even as we were in meetings, all of the government officials were surmising that it had to be more. You can't displace 33 million and it's only 10 billion. An estimated 2 billion of crops and livestock could be lost due to flooding. Remember when I said the region is a lifeline for Pakistan and for their product that they might be able to provide to other destinations. They lost 30% of their rice crop, 7% of their cotton crop lost. The country's third largest export, making up 11.8% of the country's total exports. That is income. That is opportunity. 10% of the sugarcane loss. Estimates show that 800 million in textile exports would be lost, 3.6 million acres of crops that have been affected, according to Pakistan authorities, and 735,000 livestock have perished. These are numbers coming from Pakistan. Food is still needed, and this is going to be a long, long journey. It's difficult to see this, but let me try and bring this to the attention of my colleagues. The red area says 4 million children are under 5 years old, and this red that you can see shows that these are severely impacted areas. This takes up about a very large part of the country. 700,000 impacted 65 and over. 500,000 women are currently pregnant. Those numbers have gone up, I know. And I ask unanimous consent to put in the record a statement on the conditions in Pakistan.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to put into the record Pakistan floods report.
Without objection.
September 22. So let me draw upon these final efforts and words so that you can know that now, after we've come back, the clarion call of crisis is out. After the clarion call is out. UN chief calls for massive help as Pakistan puts flood losses at $30 billion. The UN Secretary General called for massive help as he visited the country last Friday. Record monsoon rains and glacier melt created this catastrophe. He's now calling on the international community, and we do need it. Country is enormously dependent on our help. It has been, in many instances, helpful during the Afghan evacuations of recent time, and most people are unaware of the military lives lost of the Pakistani military in fighting terrorism. The very fact that this dam that has been seen by NASA, this lake, shows that this damage is going to be far-reaching. Pakistan must reach out to the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, to be able to address this tragedy. Again, my friends, this is not normal. And if I can leave you with anything here, it is that we are in fact our brothers and sisters' keeper. And that as we see the clear evidence of a climate catastrophe, a mountain of horror, devastation unspeakable, brings your mind back to the floods of the biblical times. As we stand here today, children not rescued, 33 million people in the eye of the disaster. And again, we are waiting, tragically, for the potential of massive disease that will shut Pakistan down. I cannot conclude without my greatest appreciation to the Pakistani American community diaspora, some of whom traveled to Pakistan, the doctors and business persons and people preparing now to take huge amounts of goods or dollars to be able to help. But as I speak about that, let me tell you what UNICEF has said. With 1.1 million houses washed away and vital infrastructure destroyed, such as schools, UNICEF's representative in Pakistan, Mr. Fadel, explained that 18,000 schools have been destroyed and thousands of schools are now fully shuttered. So that means children who have lost education for 2 years also losing learning opportunities. These are the things that cannot be fixed immediately, nor can they be fixed only with emergency help. And that is why I ask for the following. One, a major focus and a research and dissecting of the climate catastrophe that occurred that would generate the kinds of monsoons that caused 33 million people to be displaced. The state of Texas is about 29 million, and that would mean the wiping out of an entire state. 33 million displaced. There are towns that are not as large as 650,000, equal that to the women that are pregnant without medical care. We can all imagine and know what 1,300 dead are and more possibly being found. And we can also understand when the Army Chief of Staff reminds us in his story of the mother who came holding the infant that was hungry and said, "Here, I cannot feed my baby." So the government is fearful of a food security crisis. I've already said to you that cotton is gone, wheat is gone, income is gone, and therefore, what is next? This is what we need. International funding that will be complemented by private funding from the Pakistani diaspora. I believe we need a massive infusion of tents, the quality of which the United States has begun to bring and drop into Karachi. More need to come. I also believe that food goods are going to have to be airlifted into hard-to-place areas and into the camps that have been established. And then, of course, I am begging for the international medical community, the World Health Organization, to airlift medical facilities into the region. They've got to set them up in levels of dry land, the ability to treat waterborne diseases, and a separate ability to help deliver babies and to take care of the elderly. And so, my friends, I have tried to provide a reason for us to come together. Pakistan is still in danger. Flooding may take up to 6 months. And we were even told that there may be more rains coming. We know what happened to the people of Kentucky. We've watched the devastation of their story. And so we don't take lightly what can happen in difficult times. We realize that people have suffered all over the world. But with my own eyes, that of my colleagues, I documented that Pakistan is suffering. Oh, it's a country far away. But I know the capacity and the heart of the American people. And I know the effectiveness of the United States military and the effectiveness of our own humanitarian aid and the State Department, USAID. And I know the compassion of President Biden and the administration. Let us work together with the United States Congress. I want to thank the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the chair of Homeland Security, for their contributing efforts. And of course, Foreign Affairs Committee, as we look at collaborative ways to be of help. And I want to thank my colleagues, the Bipartisan Pakistan Caucus, and the members of the Senate who likewise have been advocates for the region. This is Southeast Asia, a very important region, that Pakistan has to be able to be stood up, and the death toll cannot increase, and the agony of the people just cannot continue. Join me in my efforts to provide more resources, healthcare, food, housing, tents, and the care of yet-born babies, and the restoration of the land. That is being a good neighbor, a good Samaritan, and as well, a nation as the United States has always been, a problem solver. I thank my colleagues for listening, and I thank, again, the Pakistani diaspora for their heart. And yes, we went because our hearts were torn with grief. And if anything we gave to the people, we wanted to give them hope that America was there to be a friend. And as I spoke and my words were interpreted, I said, we are here from the United States Congress, but we are Americans. And when the word America was said, the people applauded and smiled. Maybe the only word that they grasped. America was here to help. Again, I thank my colleagues for listening, and I know and feel that we will gather together and provide the comfort and resources needed by the people of Pakistan. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Pursuant to Section 1 of the House Resolution 1230,